going on, Imperials? It's Emperor Cubone here. With over 1,000 Pokemon these days, it can be easy to simply gloss over a fair amount of them and not really give them a second thought. I mean, when's the last time you thought about a Spritzy? But every now and then there's the perfect storm of combining a great Pokemon idea with designs and naming, but they largely go unappreciated. Especially for the ones that we've known for years. And of course I'm talking about outside of Battle Pokemon specifically. We just sort of stop seeing their brilliance and take them for granted. But you gotta keep that spark alive, folks. Keep appreciating the ones that you love. And all of this came to a head last week when I was looking over Ambipom. Now, I know some people don't really care for Ambipom's design, I used to be one of them in fact, but while I usually just vaguely acknowledge that I like it whenever I see the long-tailed monkey, this time I paused and fully took in how effective this evolution was. With Apom being a clever combination of palm and ape, simply adding an extra tail hand might have been a cheap idea, but calling it Ambipom is perfect. Being ambidextrous and having equal control over both hands, sneakily becoming a member of the four-armed Pokemon Club, yet nobody ever talks about it being on par with Machamp. Like I said, it's easy to overlook magnificent touches such as this when we're familiar with the Pokemon for years on end, but these are the subtleties that make the Pokemon world great. Not that other series don't provide such intricacies like, Sham Hatwitch, I guess, but even modern Pokemon can go underappreciated after a short time, such as Knackley. On the surface, just being a boring block of salt that vaguely looks like a Mario power-up, but the name simply being NaCl for sodium chloride is genius, to the point that you don't even really notice it at first, even if its middle stage is a bit weirder. Although some people seem to think that Garganicle looks like a temple, and so that part of its name comes from tabernacle, but, the tabernacle was a big tent, its mobility being its central feature, not made out of stone, so maybe do a little more reading before you believe everything, guys. Anyway, another more relatively recent Pokemon that I quite enjoy is Minior. I probably would have liked it in its static form, but the fact that its shell can break off to reveal a colorful center like it's some Wonka candy makes it all the more enjoyable to try and capture. However, the name Minior, like the Pokemon, is multi-layered. Most importantly, it sounds like meteor to cover the space origins, but these orbital rocks are described as consuming minerals in the upper atmosphere, and that's what gives them their distinct colors, so a portmanteau of mineral and meteor comes out to the fitting name for this cosmic Pokemon, who is also a rock type, so it works for both. But furthermore, the mini part of the name could also be for how small it is, with it only being a foot tall. So a mini meteor is also an acceptable interpretation, but the double meaning is quite fitting for this adaptable little piece of space debris. Likewise, I want to look at another more recent rock type, this time from Galar, Dreadnought. Maybe I'm biased because I loved this Pokemon ever since it was first revealed in the pre-release trailers, and I instantly wanted it on my team, but the Pokemon is wonderful in so many ways, not least of which just being different from all of the other turtles that we've seen before. With multiple turtles and tortoises over the generations, bringing in a vicious snapping turtle provides some much needed attitude. But even the name Dreadnought is a great play off of Dreadnought, in this case likely referring to large naval battleships, but using Gnaw at the end to highlight its snapping tendencies. Although this also works as a simple mashup of Dread and Gnaw, telling you how dreadful this jagged, hostile creature can be. So a triple reading of the name together with its serrated shell makes Dreadnought one of the coolest turtles around. Not to mention its powerfully imposing Gigantamax form being thrown into the mix, but just because we've been familiar with it for longer than most Gen 8 Pokemon, I don't want us to overlook just how impeccably put together it all was. Another Pokemon that kind of flies under the radar is Ferroseed. I know that its evolved stage Ferrothorn gets a lot of press for how useful it can be as a wall, but to me the design and name is a little lackluster compared to its base form. Ferroseed, on the other hand, is just a spiky little ball, not like we don't have enough of those already in Pokemon, but what makes it great is the seamless nature of its name. Seed is obvious in its meaning, but not everyone might know that ferrous refers to its metallic side, indicating iron in its structure and possibly metallic properties, which is extra fitting because it is found in Chargestone Cave. So a ferrous seed being named Ferroseed is so perfect. and it flows much better than its next stage, even if in one iteration it is completely motionless and other times it spins like a top. But honestly, what else were they supposed to do for the first combination of grass and steel? Next, I would like to give Hoenn the spotlight and point out maybe the most overlooked Pokemon in that whole roster, Relicanth. I mean, honestly, how often do you think about this lonesome fish in comparison to all of the awesome Pokemon that Gen 3 brought to the table? And it's not even that Relicanth is bad, it can just be a little bit boring if you don't know what it's about. But the inspiration for this Pokemon is the Coelacanth, which was a fish that was thought to be long extinct, only to be discovered in the modern day, matching the fossils perfectly. So, that's why they say Relicanth has remained the same since the time of the fossil Pokemon, as it shares that same backstory, and the rock typing no less, with of course the first part of its name, Relic, denoting how it is a living piece of history. I guess maybe that's why you have to use one as part of the puzzle to break out the Reggies. Also, just a quick one, but I wanted to look at Trevenant. If Chestnut wasn't the starter in Kalos, this easily would have been my favorite grass type of the region, because it is such an amazing design, and we rarely seem to get just straightforward tree Pokemon in grass. But this hauntingly intimidating design is great, and the name makes it all the better as a combination of tree and revenant, which means one that returns from the dead. You know, like that one movie that Leo won the Oscar for. So the fact that this tree has now returned to life because of the malevolent spirit inhabiting it is perfect. And honestly, it makes this undead plant even scarier just knowing all of that. But if I can keep it on the ghost type for just a little bit, I also want to sing the praises of Palossand. I did use a Palossand even when already choosing the ghost type starter, but I had to pick up one of these haunted sandcastles as well, because I was kind of waiting for a sand-based Pokemon for a long while. But the name Palossand is great by describing the Pokemon as a palace made of sand, since it is a castle. So, Palace Sand is nice enough, but one could argue that it also sounds like pile of sand. So that little extra meaning is fun, and when you throw all that together with the lore of drawing in prey with a shovel and then dragging them down into the depths, only for their grudge at having been killed spawning a new Sandygast being the way that they repopulate, is so terrifying. But even that's not all, because the design intricacies even spill over to the ability in this case, with water compaction, creating higher defenses when hit with a water attack, because sand does become more dense when wet. Plus, its signature move of Shore Up also fits, so maybe it's good that they waited for so long to make a sand Pokemon, so that they could include these extra signature flourishes to truly make the whole thing perfectly align in a satisfying package. However, maybe the Pokemon that go the most underappreciated are the originals. You may laugh at this because Kanto seems to constantly get promotion, but what I mean is that for some people, these Pokemon have been around for their entire lives. So it can be easy to take for granted some of the excellent naming and design choices. I specifically wanted to highlight Rapidash. In your mind, it may just be a simple horse with flames, and it kind of is, but it not only upped the ante with a unicorn horn from the base stage, but the name was also a huge upgrade. Ponyta doesn't really mean anything, but Rapidash incorporates the speed into its name, but also includes the fire type by putting Ash at the end. So, Rapid Ash tells you all you need to know about this fast fire type. However, the name could also read as a portmanteau of rapid and dash to double down on its fleet-footed nature, which is good because that means the name will still work when not a fire type, like in the Galarian form. Unlike, say, Sandslash, who doesn't make sense to have a different type, Rapidash is not solely locked into the fire element, with the fluffy magical unicorn version still being just as fast as the original. So both versions of the Pokemon can run with the same name, despite their very different takes on being just a plain old horse. And lastly, before we go, I wanted to look over at the Johto region, but there are quite a few obvious choices for this sort of thing, with the likes of Sudowoodo or Girafarig, or even Magcargo as Pokemon with great unique combinations of name and design, but I think that we could all use a little more appreciation for the undervalued, simple Murkrow. As a new member of the Dark-type, Murkrow was of interest in Gen 2, even if you couldn't really catch it all that much, but a crow is an ideal representative for the Dark-typing, given its creepy reputations, and indeed, as you may know, a group of these birds is called a murder of crows, so they decided to merge the two together and simply call it Murkrow. But the creep factor doesn't stop there, because this evil harbinger intentionally has a hat almost like that of a witch. And actually, if you look at the beta version, it was much more obvious and pointed. But even so, the tail is not just a regular bird tail, but the feathers are designed to look like a witch's broom that it can use in flight. And as Murkrow is also part flying type, it all just fits. Now, it is true that Murkrow doesn't really seem as magical as all that witchy theming would lead you to believe, but it was the counterpart of Misdreavus as a similarly spooky Pokémon. So maybe it simply traded all of those aspects over to Mismagius upon evolution instead? And that is worth noting too, that Honchkrow clearly went in a very different direction as the head honcho of a crime family, sort of a godfather bird, but if you really wanted to stretch it to make it make sense, you could interpret the Merc part of the name like a mercenary, and say that Murkrow was a low-level hitman in the mob and had to work his way up to the top of the organization. That might be my own level of Tabernacle overthinking, but even with the vast departure that its evolution takes, I think Murkrow should have its day in the sun, or rather moonlight I suppose would be appropriate, to be fully appreciated as the inspired idea that it is. Being familiar with it for decades should not dull our admiration for a quality product. So even though we've seen these same Pokemon dozens or hundreds of times, I hope that we can all occasionally view them with a reinvigorated respect for the cleverness and subtlety that can too often be taken for granted in a long-standing series such as this, especially outside of the realm of combat where other Pokemon get to shine. Which Pokemon would you say are underappreciated for their creative efforts? Let me know down in the comments. Also be sure to leave a like, share this video, and subscribe so that you too can become an Imperial today. And until next time, stay grounded.